Did you know that for just $5 a month, you can sponsor a 46-year-old man's attempt to live with a modicum of dignity after having spent his prime years of wealth creation pursuing a career within a dying academic discipline by completing an advanced degree program in the field of American history, all the while accruing massive student debt in the futile hopes that it would all somehow pay off, only to discover that the pessimists in his program who incessantly whispered, "You know we're not going to get jobs, right?" were actually fucking correct, and that after years of useless and humiliating submissions of applications and job letters and unofficial transcripts effectively gave up on ever achieving professional success, telling himself that it's not his fault, it's just the system, you couldn't possibly have known that the academic job market would collapse, while simultaneously battling the constant hum of self-doubt and hatred that screamed from somewhere deep inside that said, yes, in fact, it is your fault. You could have majored in business like the students you taught at your shitty adjunct jobs, students you ridiculed at bars with other bitter, self-described, quote, anti-capitalist professors, students who now smile back at you in pictures on social media, men and women decades younger than you who actually fucking smile from the balconies of their luxury apartments in Brooklyn, mocking the very principles by which you lived by proving that capitalism does in fact work for a lot of people, and that your own pitiful situation is a result of having written yourself out of the system by hiding in the academy with other self-pitying curmudgeons who will also never have a nice apartment in Brooklyn, or anything else for that matter, because they bought a set of ideas that sent them down a cul-de-sac where nothing lives but resentment and envy and anger, and that despite these feelings, he still has somehow managed to create a couple things in life that actually make him feel proud, most notably by writing a book about people in the past who faced challenges far more daunting than his own, and yet were still able to muster the strength and heroism that lived within them to fight for themselves and others, and whose stories still inspire him to find that well of courage that must also, somewhere, reside within himself, and that he also, nearly 10 years ago, started speaking into a microphone about history and culture and politics, the resulting product being a podcast called Nostalgia Trap that has, almost impossibly, gathered an audience of strangers who actually listen to the interviews and thoughts and ideas he shares, and that this podcast remains one of his only lifelines to whatever positive feelings for humanity he still clings to, that the idea of other people gaining any kind of insight or value from this podcast provides him with that ever-elusive and easily derided but absolutely vital feeling called hope. Hope that better things are possible, not just for him, but for everyone else. Hope that all is not lost. Hope that the world isn't as dark and debased a place as years of ruminating on war and genocide and environmental catastrophe would lead one to believe. Hope that the Elon Musks and Joe Rogans and Donald Trumps and Benjamin Netanyahus of the world don't get to just win simply because they say so. Hope that by sharing our feelings and thoughts with courage and honesty, we can help each other survive, not only physically, but psychically. The onslaught of cruelty that tells us on a daily basis to just give up and join the hordes of bros and shitheads that demand annihilation of self, of humanity, of the earth and air and water and animals that give us life. Hope that, to quote Hunter S. Thompson, somebody, or at least some force, is tending the light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, believe it or not, that's what a mere $5 a month can do. The link to our Patreon page is in the episode description. I mean he, would appreciate you checking it out. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Well, okay, my friends, let's do this. It is Monday, November 25th, 2024. My name is David Parsons. I welcome you to News Trap / Nostalgia Trap. News Trap is part of the Nostalgia Trap organization. I hope that's clear. I want to talk about a few things that are happening in the world today and respond to and share some of the excerpts or screenshots, as we like to call them, that Justin Rogers Cooper has urged us to pay some attention to this week. I'm thinking a lot about Elon Musk. Obviously, I have been for a while. He's an important figure, at this point, I would say, world historical figure, and one who has had a kind of very rude intrusion into my own life here at home in Ventura, California in recent years, and especially ramping up in recent months, with the SpaceX launches causing these sonic booms that come out of nowhere, usually at night around 8:30, 9:30, sometimes 10:30 or 11 p.m. All of a sudden, we'll just hear this insane noise that shakes the house, rattles the windows, and honestly scares the fuck out of everybody in the house, including me and my wife and the cats. And it just feels like so personal, and it feels like something that we have no power against. This is Musk's company, SpaceX, launching Starlink satellites up into the sky. I think there are tens of thousands of them that they're having ambitions to launch up there. It's all super disruptive, and I posted something about it on Reddit last weekend where I was complaining about these and wondering out loud, like, what would we do if our windows start breaking, if our eyes start bleeding, if our ears start popping, if this actually causes hurt and pain to us? How would we ever have the power to stop it or disrupt this process at all? It seems like people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are going to do whatever the fuck they want. And I think that's part of the theme I wanted to explore today, is sort of like, not how far will they go when they take power officially in January, but how far can they go? Because I don't think it's a question of what they want to do. I think they want to transform this nation and this world in really profound and ugly ways. And the responses from people on Reddit, they are all over the place, obviously. There are a lot of critics of Musk and Trump on Reddit, clearly. But there are also people who are like, what's the problem? This is progress. In other words, they put SpaceX in the historical continuum with like NASA as like, this is just helping humanity. This is just space exploration. Instead of realizing that, I don't know, there is no progress here. There is no gift to humanity that Elon Musk is going to provide for us. Tesla, SpaceX, these companies are meant to create power and profit for him and other billionaires, and that's about it. And their effect is, as I see it, totally destructive. And I have a few things I want to share about that as we move forward here. Here's the first. The door to the plant's giant casting furnace, which melts metal to be molded into the Model Y's parts, wouldn't shut, spewing toxins into the air and raising temperatures for workers on the floor to as high as 100 degrees. Hazardous wastewater from production containing paint, oil, and other chemicals was also flowing untreated into the city's sewer in violation of state guidelines. Tesla left the costly problems largely unaddressed during the critical ramp-up. As a result, the company's 10 million plus square foot plant, among the largest car factories in the world, dumped toxic pollutants into the environment near Austin for months. This account of the Austin plant's environmental problems, which haven't been reported previously, comes from emails between Texas regulators and the company obtained by the Wall Street Journal in response to public records requests, as well as interviews with former employees and other documents, including a memo sent by a whistleblower to the Environmental Protection Agency. So again, this is from the Wall Street Journal, detailing some of the environmental crimes that Tesla is committing currently, and it had to be gotten through the EPA and through basically Freedom of Information Act requests, and that's a government agency that Musk and others and Trump have targeted for deep deregulation or perhaps elimination. So this is really, really scary shit, because the guy who's in charge of this corporation that is pushing further into this environmental destruction is also in charge of perhaps federal agencies that have been the only thing holding those billionaires back from completely destroying the earth and everything we know of it. So listen to this. Musk is considered a champion of the environment for his role in pioneering the electric car industry. He has said the mission of Tesla, which is the largest maker of electric cars in the U.S., is to, quote, protect life on Earth. Yet across his business empire, Musk's companies show a pattern of breaking environmental rules again and again. Federal and state government filings and documents show. Tesla's Fremont, California facility has accumulated more warnings for violations of air pollution rules over the past 5 years than almost any other company's plants in California, according to a journal analysis of informal enforcement actions in the EPA's compliance database. It is second only to a refinery owned by oil and gas behemoth Chevron, which is in nearby Richmond. Musk's rocket company, SpaceX, has also had run-ins with regulators in Texas and community pushback in Florida, including over the impact of its launches on local plants and animals. Federal regulators recently fined the company for dumping about 262,000 gallons of wastewater from launches into wetlands in Texas without a permit. SpaceX has denied the allegations. Complying with environmental rules isn't usually the top priority for Tesla management, people familiar with the company's officials said. Tesla brought to the auto industry a Silicon Valley ethos to move fast and break things, and Musk views regulations as a hindrance to innovation because they slow down the work, the people said. Environmental lawyers say state regulators rely on companies to self-report environmental lapses and don't typically levy fines or take other punitive measures against them. The underlying theme for enforcement is to create an environment where companies get back to compliance, rather than to penalize them heavily and discourage them from self-reporting, says environmental lawyer Lynn Grayson. What a fucking joke, right? The pond was filled with toxins, including sulfuric and nitric acids, and the algae-colored water had begun to smell of rotten eggs, former employees said. At one point, employees found a dead deer in the water. For a time, Tesla discharged untreated pond water directly into the sewer system without permission from Austin Water, the water utility for the city, according to former employees and emails from regulators. So listen to how profound that is. Tesla discharging untreated pond water directly into the sewer system without permission from the public utilities. I mean, this is more Flint, Michigan water poisoning that Elon Musk's companies are performing directly. Environmental staff notified Austin Water, but one member refused to comply with a request from Tesla managers to lobby the regulator not to consider the violation as a significant non-compliance, according to the memo. In late November, Tesla again urged the environmental staffer to reach out to Austin Water. The staffer refused. That same week, Tesla fired the staffer for, quote, pushing back on the requests, according to the memo. So there you go. I mean, it's ruthless shit, and you've got whistleblowers and people who are refusing to take these actions that are then being fired. It's a consolidation of power, obviously, and it's frightening to think that Elon Musk could be in charge of the American federal government if he's going to run it in the same way that he runs his companies, which is in an authoritarian way and with the Silicon Valley ethos of what? Move fast and break things. I think that seems like the tone of the historical moment we're going to be in the next few years is we're going to watch things moving fast and breaking. And that part of it is a little bit frightening. And I'm wondering how far can they go, not how far will they go. Here's another end of this. I know a lot of Nostalgia Trap listeners are connected to, one way or the other, the American university system, which I think we can expect to be under significant attack from the Trump administration. And, I connect this all to like the Joe Rogan bro shit. I mean, my anger at this is pretty high, even though as a person who has spent a lot of time in the university, I can recognize a lot of the contradictions here and a lot of the anger at the elitism and the sort of dumb directions that American academic culture has gone. But either way, we're going to see some powerful lashings of that culture as we watch the Trump administration take over next year. This guy, Christopher Rufo, who is a right-wing douchebag provocateur, but also someone with some power who has been attacking relentlessly the idea of critical race theory over the last several years. He's got some ideas. Listen to this. Rufo said he is meeting with members of the Trump administration next month. He has said he thinks colleges and universities have been taken over by the left, and he wants to recapture them by cutting federal money to schools that continue to engage in DEI practices. He also wants to excise race-based affirmative action from any institution with which the federal government does business. He has a particular animus toward elite universities, which he says traded merit and rigor for neo-Marxism and discrimination against white and Asian people. It's time to really put the hammer to these institutions and to start withdrawing potentially billions of dollars in funding until they follow the law. Rufo said he has succeeded in demonizing critical race theory and DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the public's mind. Now he wants to uproot what he sees as an administrative state that keeps the policies in place across universities, government, and businesses. Rufo, along with former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, says Trump should reverse President Lyndon Johnson's executive order establishing affirmative action in the federal government. The American Civil Liberties Union and other organizations say Rufo's work promotes denial about racism and contend that the wider Republican push against DEI practices undermines racial equity and stifles free speech. So there is a war coming. I don't know how prepared the American university system is for this war, but I expect it to be really, really ugly. And I think that the people who have been complaining about the so-called Marxist left in the academy finally have a degree of power to actually do something about it, specifically hit colleges where it hurts, and that's money, right? So we can talk about academic freedom, we can talk about culture, but really they want to just, impoverish the American university system, and I'll be interested to see where they go with that. Okay, there's a couple other things I want to mention here. Some have followed the story of Russia and Ukraine and the kind of the wormhole that war has brought us to. I say some have followed. Obviously, a lot of people are following this, but this angle in particular with the kind of like Russia gathering forces from around the world, particularly North Korea, is expanding to those like Houthi rebels. I think it's that dude Hassan Piker, who's like some douchebag left-wing podcaster. He's done shows about how these like sexy Houthi pirates, who are actually just like a bunch of terrorists, honestly. But either way, listening to the way that these Houthis are now engaging in the war in Ukraine is interesting. Listen to this. U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, confirmed Russia is actively pursuing contacts with the Houthis and discussing weapons transfers, though he declined to be more specific. We know that there are Russian personnel in Sanas helping to deepen this dialogue, he said. The kinds of weapons that are being discussed are very alarming and would enable the Houthis to better target ships in the Red Sea and possibly beyond. So for those that don't pay attention to this story, these Houthi rebels or pirates, what they've been doing is disrupting supply chains within these waters and essentially fighting the war by attacking cargo ships. And that, I think, is an angle that I want to explore further as we move through this, is the idea that, you know, this is a supply war, this is an industrial war, this is one where access to key shipping lanes that allow minerals and technology and medicine to flow freely are being disrupted, and Russia is playing a role in that. I signed it because I was scared, he said. They were then put on buses to Ukraine, given rudimentary military training, and sent to a military base near Rostov, near the Ukrainian border. Many of the original group of arrivals died in Ukraine, Abdullah said, brought to the war by scammers who traffic in human beings. It was all a lie. So the way that Justin puts that in his comment here is they're trafficking Houthis to Ukraine for meat waves and giving the leaders in Yemen missiles for Red Sea attacks. So this is, to me, is just, more of an expanding world war scenario, and one that I know that you've heard us talk about before on the show. That's where I think things are going. And I'm not the only one. We'll hear from a NATO dude in a second who says this is all prep for world war, or it's not just prep, it is world war. So there's more stuff here about Germany. I'm going to save that for Justin to talk about On Friday, we'll be doing a news trap on the Patreon, so go check that out and stay tuned for that on Friday after Thanksgiving. We'll have a Black Friday special edition of News Trap where we sort of game a lot of this out with Justin, who, again, is paying attention to a lot of what's going on in Europe and what's going on in Japan, and a little bit here of what's going on in Israel. Netanyahu won huge with this war, and as much as the campus left and other activists and even myself feel that what he's achieving there is genocide and we wish there was some way to stop it, it doesn't seem like there is. And Netanyahu is going to get away with this, and he's consolidating power now. Listen to this. In recent days, they've called for the sacking of Israel's attorney general, military chief, and head of the Shin Bet Internal Security Agency, all of whom they view with suspicion, and are making plans to revive an effort to overhaul the country's judicial system, which critics say would imperil Israeli democracy. I always thought it was a choice between either a terrible, endless war or creeping authoritarianism, but apparently you can have both, said Amos Harel, a defense analyst and author of a book on civil-military relations. And senior government ministers such as far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich have called on Netanyahu to fire the Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara, the country's top legal official, who has consistently ruled against the government, deeming large parts of its agenda illegal or unconstitutional. Guy Lurie, a research fellow and expert on judicial institutions at the Israel Democracy Institute, says it's clear the government is building a case to fire Baharav Miara. But he warned that such a move would be complicated and cause an unprecedented legal quagmire, not least due to Netanyahu's corruption trial. It's hard to see how firing the Attorney General can be seen as reasonable and not a severe conflict of interest, Lurie said. An Attorney General, like an IDF Chief of Staff, has never in Israeli history been officially sacked. So that's an interesting precedent, and one that I would sort of compare, maybe not valuably or accurately, but I would make the comparison with the Attorney General fight that's happening here with Matt Gaetz. It did, provide liberals with like a little win that Matt Gaetz had to resign or withdraw his pursuit of the Attorney General position, because that was a nightmare thought. And I think we'll get a nightmare Attorney General no matter what. But it does prove that, Trump doesn't always get exactly what he wants, that there is still like a little bit of a process and a set of legal structures that are going to be our only hope, really, to stop what they are able to do. And that's why I say, what can they do, not what they want to do, because we know what they want to do. Okay, I think one other thing. Yeah, I want to mention this continuing sort of ramp up to war as connected to different nations building up their industrial bases. We know that was the story of World War II. That's the story that's going on now. Listen to this. The timing is crucial. At roughly $1.3 million a pop, every American Abrams missile fired at North Korean positions in Kursk or Russian logistics nodes is a costly loss of capability, irreplaceable until production lines adapt. As the U.S. moves from Abrams to the precision strike missile system, manufacturers must maintain legacy systems while ramping up next-generation capacity. Such constraints force hard choices about immediate battlefield impact versus long-term deterrence requirements. Joe Biden's protracted hesitation over Ukraine's strike capabilities reflected this reality. In particular, Pentagon officials focused on how NATO's decade of defense austerity had created vulnerabilities to Kremlin pressure. The next 6 months will test whether this industrial mobilization can meaningfully affect battlefield dynamics in Ukraine. As Putin and Kim Jong-un calculate their responses to expanded Western strike capabilities, they're betting against industrial capacity rather than military capability. For investors and policymakers, the message is that European security will depend on industrial policy as much as military strategy. Along with storm shadow strikes in Ukraine, innovations in defense industrial cooperation suggest that European powers understand this. The question is whether their defense industrial base can adapt quickly enough to matter. So that's some interesting shit. And I'm reading this book right now called Inferno by Max Hastings, who is a very well-known British military historian. Inferno is sort of a one-volume take on World War II, and it goes in order. So the first chapter is called Poland Betrayed. It's about Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939 and how the British and the French were unable to muster up the will or the industrial and military capabilities to confront the Nazi regime, and that led to this wormhole where Stalin begins attacking Finland, and we go from there. It's really, really scary shit, and it resonates deeply with the stuff that's happening in Ukraine right now and honestly around the world. And I'm sure I'll have more to share from Max Hastings' Inferno as I continue to read it. It's a really scary book. It's got a kind of very strategic military kind of take on things, but it's also told through the eyes of people on the ground. So you've got a little bit of that Howard Zinn People's History of the United States thing going on. Definitely not the left-wing version of that, but a kind of voices of the people. And God, the way the invasion of Poland is rendered, the way the invasion of Finland is rendered, it's just absolutely horrifying shit, but it rhymes deeply with the kind of things we're seeing in the world right now. And I have no idea how this will accelerate or not as Trump takes over, because there are a lot of people who have convinced themselves that Trump's going to pull out the U.S. out of NATO or pull the U.S. out of Ukraine and going to end war. He's some sort of peacemaker. We'll see how that goes. But here's a comment from a NATO official named Bauer, who's talking about just the straight kind of industrial element of this. But listen to this. This is from today. Bauer noted Western dependencies on supplies from China, with 60% of all rare earth minerals produced and 90% processed there. He said chemical ingredients for sedatives, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and low blood pressure medicines were also coming from China. We are naive if we think the Communist Party will never use that power. Business leaders in Europe and America need to realize that the commercial decisions they make have strategic consequences for the security of their nation, Bauer stressed. Businesses need to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly, because while it may be the military who wins battles, it's the economies that win wars. And obviously that's something we did see in World War II, is it was these national economies, what they were able to produce, not only militarily, but for their people. That's who were able to triumph over these really, really ugly scenarios. And again, I'm not wishing for any of this stuff. I'm just reading the news, man. And I hope you enjoyed News Trap today. Again, we have lots more on the way for you. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you'll be able to listen to our News Trap on Friday with Justin Rogers Cooper. Very much looking forward to that one. Thanks so much for being a listener, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.